On the morning of October 13th, 1307, the mighty Knights Templar ceased to exist, at least officially. In France, royal agents raided their strongholds, seized their property, and dragged their brothers to prison. The Pope denounced them, the king condemned them, and just like that, the most powerful military order in Christendom vanished. But here's the problem: not all of them were captured. Thousands were unaccounted for. No mass graves, no great battles, just silence. So where did they go? Who helped them, and why, centuries later, do whispers still point to the shadows where they might have survived? To trace their fate, we must step softly through royal archives, forgotten coastal routes, and abbeys that never made the maps. This isn't about treasure or secret bloodlines. It's about movement, disappearance, reinvention. And above all, about the places that opened their gates when the rest of the world slammed them shut. The story of the Templars is often told in grand terms: crusades, cathedrals, accusations of heresy whispered behind candle-lit walls. But beneath the surface lies a quieter history, a secretive one, a story not of their downfall, but of their survival. You see, for every fortress stormed and commander arrested, there were brothers who slipped through the net. Men trained in strategy, fluent in multiple languages, and well-connected across Europe's fractured kingdoms. Some found ports, some found passage. Others found shelter in places where papal decrees held no sway. Over the next few hours, we'll follow them, not to the Holy Land, but westward, northward, into mountains, coastlines, cloisters, and cities, into the forgotten corridors of power, and into the hearts of kingdoms with their own reasons to protect what others wanted destroyed. Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. The collapse came swiftly. One morning, the Templars were untouchable warrior monks with a network spanning Europe and the Holy Land. The next, they were fugitives. But not all of them. The arrests orchestrated by King Philip IV of France were surgical-focused and limited by geography. While France bore the brunt of the persecution, the broader reach of the Templar network meant that many members, particularly those stationed beyond Philip's immediate influence, had time to prepare, time to flee, and time to vanish. Not every man in the order carried the same risk. At the center of the danger were the high-ranking brothers, regional commanders, treasurers, those with access to property titles, financial records, and coded correspondences. These men posed the greatest threat to the monarchs, who now viewed the Templars not just as heretics, but as bureaucratic liabilities. Their testimonies could unravel land claims. Their knowledge of royal debts, especially in France, could prove politically fatal. And their movements, should they escape, could destabilize what Philip sought most control. But others were also vulnerable in more subtle ways. The chaplains who had been entrusted with the order's spiritual secrets, the scribes who maintained archives that were suddenly inconvenient, and even older knights with deep roots in specific regions, they all risked interrogation, or worse. Younger recruits, ironically, were safer. Lacking high-level knowledge or political value, many were left in the margins of the arrests, or quietly filtered back into civilian life. Still, fear lingered. Papal bulls had been issued. Suspicion stretched far beyond the borders of France. One lesser-known, yet telling detail, emerges from letters preserved in the Avignon archives. A cluster of former Templars in northern Italy petitioned to enter the Cistercian order, citing a desire for silence and spiritual humility. The tone is humble, almost broken. But some historians suspect a different motive: protection. The Cistercians had long-standing ties to the Templars. They shared architecture, ritual, and at times abbots. If any monastic community might absorb the fugitives discreetly, it was them. the categories of those seeking sanctuary begin to reveal themselves through a pattern. First, those with knowledge, financial, diplomatic, or theological. Second, those who had visibility, men known by local authorities or associated with specific estates. Third, those stationed in regions suddenly hostile to the order. And finally, those caught between men without titles but marked by proximity to power. This question of who needed sanctuary most leads to broader implications. Why did no continent-wide manhunt emerge? Why were certain brothers left untouched? And why do records of many disappear? Not with drama, but with a quiet fading one day, a functioning preceptory, the next, an abandoned estate, the men simply gone. There are debates, of course. Some scholars argue that many of these disappearances were just record-keeping failures, medieval bureaucracy at its inconsistent best. Others suggest that political motivations shaped which records were kept, which were altered, and which were lost. There's even a theory that some Templars willingly accepted confession, penance, and obscurity as a spiritual escape, choosing to disappear not from fear, but from faith. And yet, the sheer consistency of vanishing figures, especially from France, northern Italy, parts of Occitania and beyond, suggests something more deliberate. Survival required planning, networks, quiet allies, and perhaps most importantly, havens where the eyes of kings and popes could not easily reach. Those havens didn't exist in a vacuum. They were built, or rather opened, by those who stood to gain from sheltering skilled, well-connected men suddenly removed from power. But before we follow those corridors, ships, and mountain paths, we must linger a moment longer on the question of risk. Because in every disappearance, there's a calculation: who was worth saving, who was too dangerous to abandon. And in that calculation, we begin to glimpse the outlines of a new map. Not one of crusader states or military outposts, but of refugees scattered, concealed, and cunningly chosen. Escape often begins in silence. No declarations, no grand gestures, just footsteps in the dark. For the Templars who avoided arrest in France, the clock began ticking on the morning of October 13th, 1307. What mattered most in that moment wasn't loyalty or faith. It was distance. Getting out of France quickly, quietly, and without drawing